The look on my son Mark's face when the lawyer read out the final deed of gift, I wish I could have bottled that expression and sold it as a cure for greed. It was a mixture of pure, unadulterated shock and a growing, sickly realization that the $4 million inheritance he'd been spending in his head for a decade had just vanished into thin air. He looked at me, his mouth hanging open, while his sister Sarah sat next to him, her face turning a shade of white I've only ever seen on a fresh coat of primer. 20 years of them taking me for granted, 20 years of being treated like a disposable bank account, and they never once considered that I might have a plan of my own. But to understand why they had no one to blame but themselves, I need to take you back to the beginning. I wasn't born into money. I grew up in a town where you either worked in the mill or you left. I chose the mill, and I stayed there for 42 years. I started on the floor, breathing in sawdust and sweat, and eventually worked my way up to floor manager. Every extra cent I made, I invested. I bought land when people said it was worthless, 120 acres of scrub brush and timber out in Blackwood Creek. I built our family home there with my own 2 hands, stone by stone, beam by beam. I wanted my kids, Mark and Sarah, to have the kind of security I never had. I paid for the private tutors, the elite club sports, and eventually the Ivy League tuitions. I thought I was giving them a head start. What I didn't realize was that I was actually giving them a reason to stop trying. Martha, my wife, was the heart of that house. She kept me grounded, and she kept the kids humble, or so I thought. But after she passed away 5 years ago, the cracks in the foundation started to show. It started small, a missed phone call on my birthday, a quick text on Christmas instead of a visit. Then the entitlement began to leak out like a slow drip from a rusted pipe. Sarah married a guy named Preston, a consultant who wore suits that cost more than my first 3 cars combined, but never seemed to have a dime of his own. Mark went into high finance, or so he claimed, but he spent more time at the country club than the office. I remember the first real sting. It was 2 years after Martha died. I'd invited them both over for a Sunday roast, a tradition their mother lived for. I'd spent all morning in the kitchen, making the gravy exactly how she used to. Sarah called 10 minutes before they were supposed to arrive. She said Preston had last-minute tickets to a charity gala, and they couldn't make it. No apology, just a, "We'll catch you later, Dad." 10 minutes later, Mark texted, "Checking out a new boat with the guys. Have fun with the roast." I sat at that table alone, looking at the 2 empty chairs, and ate a plate of cold beef. That should have been my wake-up call. I should have seen then that I wasn't a father to them anymore. I was just the guy holding the deed to a piece of property that had skyrocketed in value as the city expanded toward Blackwood Creek. But I kept telling myself it was just a phase. They were busy. They were building their own lives. I kept making excuses for them because that's what fathers do. If that was all, I probably would have let it go. I'm a patient man. I've spent 40 years watching wood dry and metal cool. I know how to wait. But then came the Thanksgiving dinner last year. They actually showed up for that one, but not for the turkey. About halfway through the meal, Preston leaned back, swirled his wine, and looked around my living room with a predatory sort of grin. He didn't even look at me when he spoke. "You know, Mark," Preston said, "if we knocked out this wall and put in floor-to-ceiling glass, the resale value on this place would jump another 20%. Of course, that's assuming the old man keeps the grounds decent."
Mark laughed, a sharp, cold sound. "Dad's getting a bit slow for the groundskeeping, aren't you, Pops? We were actually talking on the way over. There's this new assisted living community over in Silver Oaks. 5-star dining, golf course. You'd love it. We could get the house on the market by spring." I felt a cold chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty windows. I looked at Sarah, expecting her to say something, to defend the home she grew up in. Instead, she just picked at her salad and said, "It really is a lot of house for one person, Dad. And the equity's just sitting there doing nothing. Mark needs a little liquidity for his new venture, and Preston and I are looking at that place in the Hamptons." They were talking about my life, my sweat, and my wife's memory like they were already dead and buried in the backyard. They didn't see me as their father. They saw me as a bank account with a heartbeat, a temporary obstacle standing between them and a $4 million payday. Something in me shifted that day. I didn't get angry. I didn't yell. I just took a slow sip of my water and said, "I'll think about it." Mark smirked at Preston, a look that said, "See, he's easy. Just a few more months." I didn't say another word about it for the rest of the night. But the next morning, as soon as the sun crested over the timberline, I started making calls. I spent the next 2 months getting everything in order. I'm a methodical man. When you're building a bridge or a house, you don't rush the blueprint. I met with my old friend Miller, a trust and estates attorney who's as sharp as a briar. I told him exactly what I wanted to do. He raised an eyebrow, gave a low whistle, and then he smiled. "It's your legacy, Arthur," he said. "You can do whatever you want with it." But before I pulled the trigger, I decided to give them one last chance. I needed to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I wasn't being a bitter old man. I needed to see who they really were when I had nothing to offer. I waited until a Tuesday morning. I called Sarah first. I made my voice sound a little shaky, a little desperate. "Sarah," I said, "I'm in a bit of a hole. There was an issue with the property taxes, some back interest I didn't know about. I'm short about $1,000, or they're going to put a lien on the house. Can you help your old man out? Just a loan for a month?" There was a long, heavy silence on the other end. $1,000? She finally asked, her voice sharp. "Dad, we're right in the middle of remodeling the guest bath. Preston says our cash flow is tight. How could you be so irresponsible with the taxes?" I know, I said, sounding defeated. "I just need a little help." "I'll have to check with Preston," she snapped. "But honestly, Dad, maybe this is a sign that you can't handle the house anymore. I've got to go. I'm late for my yoga." She hung up. 10 minutes later, I called Mark. I gave him the same story. "Geez, Dad," Mark groaned. "I'm right in the middle of a big play on some tech stocks. I can't be pulling $1,000 out of my brokerage account right now. It'll mess up my margins. Why don't you just sell that old truck of yours? Or better yet, call a realtor. I told you this was coming." I thanked him and hung up. Within the hour, I tried to call Sarah back just to see if she'd reconsidered. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried Mark. Same thing. Then I tried to send a text. System message, "This number has been blocked." They didn't just say no. They blocked me. Their own father, who they thought was facing the loss of their home, over $1,000, a sum they probably spend on a weekend in the city, and they shut me out like a telemarketer. That was the moment the last flickering candle of hope went out in my heart. They didn't want a father. They wanted a corpse with a will.
I spent the next week with Miller. We went over the paperwork 3 times. I had several assets, the 120 acres, the house, a significant investment portfolio, and the mineral rights I'd quietly held on to for decades. Total valuation, $4.2 million. I made my move with the same precision I used to align the gears at the mill. They had no idea what was coming. None of them did. I invited them over for one last family meeting on a Saturday morning. I told them I'd made a decision about the house and the liquidity they were so worried about. They showed up early, practically tripping over themselves in their haste. Preston was there, looking smug. Sarah had a brochure for a luxury senior living facility in her hand. We sat in the library, the room where I used to read them bedtime stories. Miller was sitting in the corner, his briefcase on his lap. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I know things have been tense, especially with my recent financial troubles." Mark waved a hand dismissively. "It's fine, Dad. We just want what's best for you, and for the family legacy, of course." "Of course," I replied. "I've realized that this house and this land are a burden. They're a weight around my neck, and apparently a source of stress for you two as well. You were right. I need to simplify my life." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "We're so glad you see it that way, Gad. We've already talked to a developer. He's very interested in the acreage for a new subdivision.
Blackwood Estates, he wants to call it. Interesting name, I said. But there's been a change of plans. You see, when I reached out to you both for help last week, it was a test. I didn't need $1,000. I have nearly $200,000 in a liquid savings account alone. I wanted to see if my children valued me more than their own cash flow. The room went deathly silent. Mark's smirk didn't just fade, it curdled. Sarah's grip on her brochure tightened until her knuckles were white. "Dad, that's not fair," Mark stammered. "You can't just play games with people like that." "I wasn't playing games, Mark. I was conducting an audit," I said, my voice turning cold as a winter morning. "And you both failed, miserably. You blocked my number. You were willing to let me lose my home because it was inconvenient for you." I nodded to Miller. He stood up and began handing out documents. "As of yesterday," I continued, "I have transferred the entirety of the Blackwood Creek estate, the house, and the accompanying investment funds into a perpetual charitable trust. The beneficiary is the Second Chance Animal Sanctuary. They've been looking for a permanent location for years. This land will never be a subdivision. It will be a sprawling rescue for senior dogs and abused horses. The house will serve as their administrative headquarters and a residence for the live-in caretakers." You what?" Sarah whispered. "The whole estate? Dad, that's $4 million. You're giving it to dogs?" "The dogs are more loyal than the people I raised, and they certainly don't ask about resale value while I'm sitting in the room." Preston jumped up, his face purple. "This won't hold up. You're clearly not in your right mind. We'll sue. We'll have you declared incompetent." Miller cleared his throat, a small, sharp sound. "Mr. Preston, I've had Arthur evaluated by 3 independent board-certified psychiatrists over the last month. We have video depositions of those evaluations, all confirming his absolute mental clarity. Furthermore, the deed has already been recorded with the county. The trust is irrevocable. There is no legal avenue for you to challenge this." Mark looked like he was going to vomit. "But what about us? What are we supposed to do?"
"You're supposed to do what I did," I said, standing up. "You're supposed to work. You both have high-paying careers and the expensive educations I paid for. Use them. From this moment on, my financial obligation to you is 0. I've already contacted my bank. The monthly allowances for the grandkids' trust funds, which I found out you were actually using to pay your country club dues, have been terminated. Those funds are also going to the sanctuary." Sarah started to cry, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of rage. "You're ruining our lives. How could you be so selfish?" "Selfish?" I asked, almost laughing. "I spent 40 years in a mill for you. I built this place for you. And you couldn't spare $1,000 or a phone call to help me? I'm not ruining your lives, Sarah. I'm just getting out of the way so you can finally live them on your own dime." I walked them to the door. They tried to argue, they tried to plead, they tried to bring up Martha. That was their biggest mistake. "Don't you dare mention your mother," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "She would be more ashamed of you than I am. Now get off my property. You have 1 hour to clear out any personal belongings you left in your old rooms. After that, the security team I hired will be escorting you to the gate." I watched them drive away, their luxury SUVs kicking up dust on the long gravel driveway I'd graded myself 1,000 times. The silence that followed was the most beautiful thing I'd heard in years. That was 6 months ago. I moved into a small, cozy cottage on the far edge of the property, a piece of the land I kept back for myself in a life estate. I spend my mornings on the porch, drinking coffee and watching the first group of rescue golden retrievers run through the high grass of the East Meadow. The sound of their barking is a lot more musical than Preston's whining. Mark and Sarah haven't called. I didn't expect them to, and frankly, I've kept their numbers blocked on my phone. It's funny how much peace you can find when you stop waiting for people to be who you want them to be and just accept who they actually are. I worked hard my whole life to build something that would last. It turns out I did. It just wasn't the legacy my children expected. And as I watch a 3-legged lab mix chase a butterfly across my front yard, I can honestly say I've never been more satisfied with a decision in my life. My kids might have lost a fortune,
but I finally found my dignity, and that's a trade I'd make every single day.